Hello everybody. So in this brief video, I will be explaining you about supplier or vendor. Supplier or vendor. See, we keep hearing this specific word supplier vendor, right? So basically, who is a supplier? Best example would be, I will start with the example. Best example, take the automobile industry. Take the automobile industry. See, for example, in automobile industry there are many suppliers and vendors to the automobile industry. For example, take Maruti Suzuki or any Toyota or Honda. For these kind of automobile manufacturing companies, there are vendors like who supply batteries like Exide batteries, Amar Raja batteries. Similarly, tires companies, CA tires, MRF tires. Hmm? Similarly, so all these companies, sometimes Sony, who supply music systems to the automobile industry. So these kind of companies, you know, are the vendors for the automobile industry. For the automobile industry, right? So another example, take software industry. Software industry, for example, software companies, either product development company or they themselves are software services companies. For example, take Microsoft or IBM or any other companies. They take services from the vendors or people from the vendors. They take people from the vendors, right? Human resources they will hire from the vendors. There will be some recruitment firms or any other vendor organizations from whom they get the human resources required for the organization, like IBM, Microsoft, these kind of companies they do it, right? So like this, vendor organizations play major role in an organizational success and performance, right? And also organizational profitability depends on the vendor organization, right? So with this note, in this specific video we are going to discuss about what is the definition of a supplier or vendor, what is the definition of, what are the characteristics of supplier, and what is the vendor selection criteria. See, basically these two words are synonyms. Supplier or vendor are the synonyms, basically to get the same meaning, we keep using this, right? So what is the vendor selection criteria also we are going to discuss as part of this specific video, right? So basically, who is a supplier? A supplier is an individual or an organization who supply raw material or components or services to a customer organization. I repeat the definition once again. A supplier is an individual or a company who supply raw material, components or services to another business organization, also known as a customer organization, right? So let's move on and see what are the supplier characteristics. What are the supplier characteristics? See, basically, as we know, supplier supplies some raw material or components or some services to the customer company, right? That is one of the characteristic. They give the raw material. Right. Another characteristic of supplier is, they expect fair price from the customer because they are giving the raw material. They expect fair price for their whatever they are giving to customer, providing to the customer. They expect fair price for whatever they are supplying. Right. And also sometimes another characteristic is suppliers as part of their financial management aspect. Suppliers supply raw material to the customer organization on credit basis as well. On credit basis as well. That is also possible in industry. Right. And also basically supplier, what happens is supplier responds to RFP, RFI or RFQ issued by the customer organization. What is the meaning of RFI, RFP, RFQ? That is request for proposal, request for information, request for quotation being issued, or tender notification being issued by the customer organization in different newspapers and magazines. Basically, supplier responds to these RFPs, RFIs and RFQs, and the supplier organization submit the specific quotation or proposal to the customer organization, to the customer organization. right? The customer who wants to purchase certain goods or raw material or any other thing, they will put advertisement in the newspaper stating that kindly we respond to this specific proposal, or with proposal, or tender, like that they will issue in the newspapers, right, and magazines. So another thing is, basically this to this RFP, RFI, RFQ, vendor submits response. Vendor or supplier submits the response. And also this specific vendor or supplier is part of the supply chain network. We discussed, right, starting from the raw material coming from the vendor, and then going to the manufacturing plant, then to the warehouse, wholesaler, retailer, and customer doorstep. This is the supply chain, entire supply chain. So in this, he is part of the supply chain. He starts with the vendor. Basically, supply chain starts with the procuring raw material from the vendor, right? So this is one of the characteristic of supplier. Similarly, suppliers or the vendors are the potential organizations for the manufacturing plant for vertical integration. That is very much important, right? This is very much important. These sometimes what happens is these supplier organization or vendor organizations are the sources of vertical integration for the manufacturing plants. For example, automobile manufacturing company, they go and acquire the vendor who is supplying batteries, or they themselves, they want to have their own venture for batteries. Then they will acquire the battery manufacturer who is the supplier, right? So like that is known as vertical integration, going one step above and then getting the whoever is the raw material supplier, procuring that specific company, acquiring that specific company, is nothing but the vertical integration. Vertical integration, right? So suppliers are the sources of vertical integration for the manufacturing company, right? Similarly, and also the supplier basically undergoes this, submits the response to the customer's request, and also customer supplier can affect the profitability of the company, profitability of the customer organization. Supplier can affect the profitability of the supplier organization, profitability of the customer organization. How? Because supplier will be trying to increase the product price, and the customer will be trying to reduce the costs. Customer will be trying to reduce the costs. So balancing between the whatever is the demand price, demand price expected by the supplier, and what is that price the customer is expecting. They have to achieve, both supplier and the customer organization have to achieve the balance between these two prices. So this is one of the characteristic of supplier, right? And also now let's move on and see what is this vendor selection criteria. Vendor selection, also suppliers selection criteria. Basically we discussed, right? So customer organization, when they issue RFP, request for proposal or request for quotation, so many vendors or suppliers, potential vendors and suppliers respond to the RFI or RFP. Right. So, for example, there are 7 8 vendors who responded to the tender notification. Then what customer organization does? They apply certain vendor selection criteria. Certain vendor selection criteria. Right. So, based on what criteria, usually these customer organization selects the vendors. That is very much important. Right. See, basically, first one is financial health of the vendor. That is very much important. When customer chooses a specific vendor who is going to be his partner for supplying the raw material, first he will look at what is the financial health of the supplier. What is the financial health of the supplier? Is it profit making company, or they are in financial struggles? First he will check that specific factor. Next, what is the tenure of the company, supplier organization? How many years they are in the business? How many years they are in the business? That is second factor he will look into. And third factor is what is that they look into, how is the reputation of the vendor organization in the market. How is the reputation? The moment you want to partner with somebody, you will be looking at, right? So the how is the reputation of the vendor organization, they will look at. Next they will see, another fourth point is they will look at the how is the team competency. How is the team competency, technical skills of the vendor organization, that also they will look into. That also they will look into, right? So so like this, different factors, a customer organization looks from the vendor while selecting one specific vendor from the list of vendors who responded to the tender notification given by the customer organization, right? So and also vendor affects the profitability of the customer organization, we discussed it, right? So like this, vendor has got a different characteristics and undergoes the selection procedure from the customer, right? So now let us see the examples. So what is the example? Basically Bridgestone, it is a tire making company, right? Bridgestone tires are globally popular, right? Bridgestone is a supplier to the BMW. That is one of the example, right? So another example is what Rolls-Royce is supplier of Boeing. That is, Rolls-Royce supply aircraft engines to the Boeing company. You know, like this, these are all the suppliers and vendors in different industries, right? So far in this specific video, what is that we have discussed? We have seen what is the definition of a supplier. Right, we learned that a supplier is an individual or a company who supply raw material, components, or services to a specific organization. We learned that, right? Next, we have seen what are the characteristics of supplier, followed by we have seen what is the vendor selection criteria. What is that criteria a supplier undergoes before becoming a one of the preferred vendor to the customer. One of the preferred vendor to the customer. Usually customer organizations also maintain preferred vendors. For long-term partnership with the vendors, right? They maintain the preferred vendors list. So every supplier or vendor organization tries to become part of the list of the manufacturing plants among the preferred vendors, right? So okay, so thank you everybody. Let's move on.